Do you know every couple of months we hear about a guy who lost his entire life savings in Bitcoin because he installed a fake Zoom or a fake Slack installer that ended up being malicious? Well, odds are infostealers were likely involved in some capacity. Since their massive rise during the start of the Ukraine war in 2022, infostealers have been sort of like this headline threat on Mac. I mean, every story on infections, every Dan Smith who loses $1 million+ in Bitcoin theft, infostealers were sort of like the center of it. They were the malware that everyone was tracking. They were the malware that everyone was warning about. And it was just what we were seeing so much of in the wild since 2023. Make no mistake, infostealers are still around today to a huge amount. But there's a new report from Jamf that I think is really interesting, and I found that a lot of people are missing sort of the point of this report that shows infostealers are changing in a big way. This is a new report from Jamf. It's actually an annual report they do called the Security 360 Annual Trends Report. So if you're not familiar, what it is every year Jamf pulls anonymized data from basically like 1 million customers all over the world. It's one of the most useful snapshots that we get on what is actually showing up on Macs in the wild. So like this isn't malware that Jamf is testing in a lab. These are actual real detections that it's seeing in the wild. So I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but this report is that's why I just like this report so much. Is it's just like it's real infections, and it's not just something that they found on VirusTotal and stuff. So one of the key findings, they have a few, but one of the key findings from the report that was dropped is that Trojan detections went up significantly. Actually, they went up 33 percentage points in a single year, which is objectively insane. In 2024, Trojan detections were at 16%, and now in 2025, they account for over 50%. So let's continue down. They have a great graph in here that kind of shows the growth. Yeah, so this graph just sort of shows the growth of each category, each malware type since 2023. Now you could probably guess what the most dominant Trojan was in 2025. It was Atomic Stealer. Many of us know it as Amos. It accounted for 77% of Trojan detections, and I think Jamf even states that sort of below here. Yeah, infostealers. Well, yeah, I guess I'm a little out of order here, but Atomic Stealer accounted for 78% of infostealers in 2025, and if you scroll down here, it accounted for 77% of Trojans in 2025. So, you're probably asking, like, why is one family being counted as both a Trojan and an infostealer? So basically what's going on is that our clean definitions that we have of like what's a Trojan and what's an infostealer is going away. Like the line is being blurred completely. Now, a lot of the headlines I'm seeing are along the lines of like Trojans are now accounting for over half of all Mac malware in the wild. Infostealers are dropping in numbers. Trojans are the new infostealers, and so on and so on. But these tweets and headlines are sort of missing the key point here. And I'm seeing so many people like not get this. Like a Trojan is something that disguises itself as is like a legit piece of software. It gets on your machine, it sets up persistence, it sets up backdoors, so an attacker can come in later and install whatever malware after that, be an infostealer or be ransomware, et cetera, et cetera. An infostealer itself, in the early days, which we're not seeing so much today, is that they're more of like a smash and grab. They go for your iCloud keychain, they go for your browser data, your cookies, your crypto wallets, which we're seeing a lot of now, especially from the DPRK. They really love their crypto theft, the APT groups there. And then they ship it out via C2 server to somewhere around the world. But they used to do two different jobs. There were two different categories, but the distinction is dying. Modern day infostealers aren't doing that smash and grab technique that we're used to. They're not going in loud and grabbing stuff and leaving, or even going in quiet and leaving. They're just going in, grabbing stuff and staying. They drop a backdoor. They're surviving reboots. We've seen them survive logouts on Mac. They sit there and they wait for new C2 commands or commands from a C2 server, I mean. So once we do all that, I mean, congratulations, you're a Trojan now. So when Atomic Stealer lands on a Mac, it gets counted as both because it essentially does both in its nature. Um, and that's exactly why we're seeing Trojan numbers explode so much in this report. It's just that Jamf is counting infostealers as Trojans, and I mean rightfully so too. So, infostealers are just becoming the first stage of a larger attack. They can hold data for ransom, they can pivot to other accounts, they get sold and resold as a service. It's so convoluted and like honestly, just it's getting so complicated. I've talked to so many Apple security researchers on the Security Byte podcast, and they're reverse, some of them are reverse engineers, and they just talk about how in 2023 used to be able to reverse engineer a type of infostealer in just a couple of hours and understand exactly what it does and go on about writing a report and stuff. But nowadays things are getting so sophisticated because there's just so many um, avenues where malware can get detected and caught. So these threat actors have to implement so much code and so much technique so they can continue to go undetected and among other various things. But really what I want to people to take away from this report is that all infostealers act as Trojans because they have to disguise themselves to sneak onto a machine. But not all Trojans are infostealers because there's plenty of Trojans that are just pure persistence tools. They set up like file exfiltration. They set the staging for ransomware. But the point is that the most successful malware that we're seeing on Mac right now is doing the job of both in the same binary. Atomic Stealer is just the textbook case. But I don't want us to focus too much on Atomic Stealer itself because, as you may or may not know, in 2025, the threat actors behind Atomic Stealer just like disappeared from the dark web forums, and they left a big void. What's happening right now in the malware landscape is just that so many people or so many just different groups of threat actors are just putting out their own versions of Atomic Stealer. So right now we're not really seeing we're seeing code that looks like Atomic Stealer, but not necessarily Atomic Stealer. So that's also complicated and convoluted in its own way, but I don't know. I just wanted to go through this report. I've been seeing a lot of headlines about how just people are saying Trojans are taking over as the dominant form of malware, and infostealers are being knocked off, and whatever the headlines are saying. But I just kind of want to set the record straight and just kind of explain how they're becoming one of the same thing.